There's a story that's been buried for too long, and it starts with a kid named Devante, a kid you'd walk right by on the street, never thinking he was anything other than another black kid from the rough parts of the city. You probably wouldn't even give him a second glance. But you'd be wrong. Dead wrong. So here's how it all went down. And trust me, this isn't some fairy tale. This is the real deal, a clash between the underdog and the power that's been pulling the strings in this town for decades. You know that kind of power, the kind that sits behind glass towers, looks down on the street, and thinks it's untouchable? Yeah, that's where this story starts. It starts with Devante walking into the heart of the city, barefoot and determined, like he had nothing to lose. People probably stared at him, maybe even crossed the street to avoid the kid with the hoodie, the one with the look in his eye like he knew he had a purpose. But no one could see it. No one knew where he was going or why. Devante's life? It's been nothing but Sir V.Y. Val. Born and raised on the wrong side of the tracks, in a place where the only thing more common than V.Y. Olents was the sound of sirens. His parents? They were just names on a tombstone. V.Y. Tims of a fire at an old chemical plant owned by a corporate titan named Frank Harris. A man whose wealth was built on the back of people just like Devante's parents, people who worked long hours in unsafe conditions, all to make sure Harris and his crew lived like kings. And when the fire happened, well, Harris made sure to bury the truth. A couple of hush money checks, a few quick settlements, and that was that. But Devante? He wasn't HVYing it. He wasn't going to let his parents' death be another forgotten headline in the paper. He wasn't going to let Harris get away with it. You see, Devante discovered something. Something strange about himself. Something he couldn't explain. He realized he could heal people. Sounds crazy, right? But it's true. It started with his foster sister, Kira, falling off the jungle gym, her arm twisted in a way that would have had any doctor running for their life. But Devante didn't panic. He just grabbed her arm, and something warm, like electricity, rushed through him, and just like that, her arm was fine. He'd never seen anything like it. Neither had Kira. And then, after that, it happened again. And again. Each time, it took more out of him: headaches, nosebleeds, fevers, but he kept it secret. Because, you know, who would believe a black kid from the foster care system? People would think he was crazy, a freak. But that all changed the night he had a dream about his parents. It was a dream that felt too real, too VYVYD to ignore. He saw them again, their faces clearer than they'd ever been in his memory. And in the dream, they told him something that would change everything. Heal the man who hurt us, and you will find peace. And that's when Devante knew. He knew what he had to do. He wasn't just walking to some building to try and impress a billionaire. He was walking to face the man who destroyed his family, Frank Harris, and if he could heal him, maybe, just maybe, he could finally get the truth. So, barefoot, with his last pair of sneakers long gone and a city to cross, Devante made his way to Harris's empire, a towering building that looked more like a fortress than a corporate office. People stared as he passed, some avoiding eye contact, some even crossing to the other side of the street. But Devante kept walking. Every step was another small VY Tory, even though the pain in his feet was unbearable. And when he finally reached the doors of Harris's headquarters, the security guards laughed at him. They looked at him like he was a jokey, a kid who probably didn't even know what appointment only meant. But Devante wasn't laughing. He told them he could heal Harris. And they laughed harder. They mocked him, told him to leave before they called the cops. That's when something inside Devante snapped. You know that feeling when you've had enough? When you've been pushed too far, and you finally decide that you've walked too damn far to turn around. That's when it happened. He ducked under one of the guards' arms and sprinted for the elevator. The guards tackled him almost immediately. His face hit the cold marble floor, blood dripping from his split lip. But even as they dragged him away, Devante didn't back down. He shouted, "I can heal Harris. I can make him see again." And that's when the impossible happened. From somewhere high above, a voice crackled over the intercom. "What's happening down there?" Just a trespasser, Mr. Harris, the security chief replied. But then, something changed. Harris's voice, smooth and cold, came through the speaker. I heard someone mention healing. Bring him up. The guards froze. They were stunned, confused, but they did what they were told, pulling Devante to his feet and escorting him to the elevator. The elevator ride to the penthouse felt like an eternity. Devante's heart was pounding, his blood still dripping down his chin. He thought about everything that had led him here: the loss of his parents, the years of foster care, the dreams of revenge. But none of that mattered now. All that mattered was standing face to face with the man who destroyed his life. The elevator doors opened, and there he was, Frank Harris, paralyzed, blind, sitting in a wheelchair that looked more like a throne. The man who'd built an empire on the backs of people like Devante's parents was now at the mercy of a boy who was barely old enough to know how to heal. But Harris wasn't looking at Devante. He couldn't see him. But Devante could feel the power in that room, the tension in the air. I hear you can heal, Harris said, his voice sharp, like a man who didn't believe in miracles, but was willing to hear a pitch anyway. I can, Devante said, wiping the blood from his chin. Harris's assistant, Diana, scoffed. What exactly can a barefoot kid offer that doctors from Switzerland, Germany, and Japan couldn't? But Harris raised a hand to silence her. He looked at Devante like he was studying a specimen, not a human being. And then Devante said something that took everyone by surprise. I don't want your money. I want the truth about my parents' deaths. The room went dead silent. The kind of silence that only happens when everything you thought you knew about a person suddenly shifts. Harris didn't blink, didn't flinch. He just stared at Devante and said, Fine, heal me, and I'll give you the truth. And that's when it started. The healing. The connection between them was like nothing Devante had ever felt before. But with every session, it took more out of him: headaches, dizziness, blood. But something incredible happened. As Harris started to heal, Devante started to see the truth. Harris didn't just take his health. He took everything. He took lives. He took families. He took futures. And for the first time, Harris was beginning to understand that. But here's the kicker. Harris wasn't just taking Devante's health. As their connection deepened, Harris began to experience Devante's memories. The pain, the hunger, the fear of being a black kid in a world that looked at you and saw nothing but a problem. And as Harris felt that pain, something began to shift inside him. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Things weren't just about healing anymore. Things were about power, about control, about a billionaire's empire that was being torn apart by a 16-year-old kid with a power no one understood. But Harris wasn't the only one with power. The truth about the factory fire, about how Harris had sabotaged the safety measures and killed Devante's parents, was about to come out. And Devante wasn't going to let Harris get away with it. So when Harris tried to buy him off with money, Devante said no. The truth wasn't for sale. The truth had a price, and it wasn't one Harris could afford. In the end, Devante and Harris had their final confrontation. It wasn't about healing anymore. It was about justice. And when Harris tried to make a deal with him, Devante refused. You can't buy me, Devante said. Not now, not ever. And that was it. That's when Harris finally understood. Not just his illness, but his guilt, his crimes. And in that moment, he realized something no amount of money or power could fix. Devante wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for the truth, for the people who had been crushed by the system. And if Harris couldn't see that, well, then Devante was going to make sure the world did. The truth about the factory fire, the truth about Harris, the truth about power, race, and what it really means to heal. And Devante? He walked away a hero. Not because he healed Harris, but because he healed the world. Now, here's the question for you. What would you do if you had the power to heal the man who hurt you the most? Would you take the money? Or would you take the truth? Let me know in the comments. Hit that like button if you believe in justice, And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that challenge everything you thought you knew about power and healing.